During the harrowing times of World War II, the names Treblinka and Sobibor stood for the worst things about the Nazis. These places weren't just sites. They were horrible places where the Nazis killed people one by one, turning them into numbers and ashes. These camps were the worst part of the Nazis' final solution. They were run from 1941 to 1943 under the direction of Heinrich Himmler and with careful planning by Adolf Eichmann. There were horrible experiments and punishments going on inside these camps. Victims lost all of their respect and went through unbearable pain, often at the hands of famous doctors like Josef Mengele. Come with us as we show you the horrible things that happened in the worst Nazi concentration camps and show you how the Nazis killed all of their prisoners. Tracing the path to Nazi extermination. The rise of the Nazi death camps in the 20th century is one of the most horrible stories ever told. The evil ideas that led to these camps didn't just come out of nowhere. They were formed over years of strong anti-Semitic feelings, political maneuvering, and a strong desire for racial purity. When we think back to the 1930s, we can't help but notice how Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power. Hitler's nationalist ideas were well received in Germany, which was still reeling from the end of World War I and the harsh Treaty of Versailles. Hitler got a lot of support from people by giving passionate and inspiring talks. By 1933, when he became Chancellor, things had changed. His earlier words had become frightening realities. Under the guise of Aryan power, the Nazi Party started to enforce laws that hurt Jewish people. The infamous Nuremberg laws of 1935 took away Jews' German identity and made it illegal for them to marry or be in a relationship with a German. Because these rules put Jews in a bad position and made them vulnerable, they were cut off from society. The situation got worse as the 1930s went on. Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass, happened in 1938 and was supported by the government. It destroyed many Jewish-owned properties and led to the arrest of tens of thousands of Jews. This event was a sign of the terrible things that were to come. Hitler wanted Europe to be free of race strife, but the ways he planned to get there changed. At first, immigration was welcomed, but as Nazi power grew, it became impossible for a lot of people to come. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, they brought millions more Jews under their control, which sped up the process of killing them all. Heinrich Himmler, who was in charge of the SS and was close to Hitler, talked about the plan to kill all the Jews in a terrifying speech in 1943. The Nazis wanted to get rid of not only the Jews who lived there at the time, but also any children or grandchildren who might come after. This determination led to the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where top Nazi leaders came up with the final answer to the Jewish problem. Jews were to be sent to concentration camps in seized Poland, like Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, where they would be killed in a planned way. 800,000 to 1 million Jews were killed at Treblinka between July 1942 and November 1943. These numbers don't just show statistics, they show an almost unimaginable amount of human pain. The Nazis carefully built their killing camps, turning them into factories that killed people. The horrors of Treblinka and Sobibor were shown to the world. These places, like Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, weren't just thrown together. They were planned to kill a lot of people quickly. They were tricked when they got there by a fake train stop. Plans and a ticket counter made it look like it was real in places like Treblinka, but it was all a trick to keep them quiet. There was something darker going on behind this lie. There was only one reason these camps were built: to kill a lot of people. In contrast to concentration camps, where people were made to work hard, places like Sobibor were designed to kill a lot of people. Over time, their gas rooms, which were where the killings took place, got bigger. Engine gas that was dangerous was used at Sobibor. People who were killed were tricked into thinking they were going for showers and then were forced into gas chambers. At first, they used engine gas at Belzec, but later they moved to Zyklon B, a poison. The gas rooms were often made to look like showers on the outside, but they were actually places where people died. People were killed, and then their bodies were dumped into big pits. The Nazis burned the bodies all day and night in crematoriums, treating the dead like goods in a factory. People were locked up and made to dig. Everything in these places was made to kill and keep people in line. The houses, fences, and even the watchtowers were put up so that no one could fight back and so that people would die faster. Even though it was horrible, some inmates quietly fought back. They tried to stop the process of extermination by breaking tools or hiding goods. The most disturbing thing about these camps wasn't just how well they killed people. It was that the people who ran them thought it was normal. The designs weren't crazy thoughts. They were cold, well-thought-out ways to kill as many people as possible with the least amount of money. Flames of rebellion. Even though the Nazis told a very sad story about the Holocaust, there are also stories of hope and struggle that shine through. The revolt at Sobibor is a powerful example of this kind of story. It shows how strong the will of those who are being repressed can be, even in the worst of times. Sobibor was a horrible death camp in the woods of Poland. There, life was worthless, and death was common. But in the fall of 1943, rumors of rebellion in other camps led a small group of prisoners to make a daring plan to escape. Soviet Jewish prisoners of war joined them. Alexander Sasha Pacheri, a Soviet lieutenant, and Leon Feldhendler, a Polish Jew, came up with a plan to get rid of their captors. They had a brave plan: kill the SS officers and Ukrainian guards, take the weapons and charge the main gate. The plan began to move on October 14th, 1943. They killed key officers in silence with axes, knives, and sheer drive. When a body was found, chaos broke out, and the prisoners had to move faster than they had planned. Among the gunshots, about 300 of the 600 prisoners were able to escape. Sadly, many of them were caught and put to death, but their spirit had already changed things. The Nazis quickly took down the camp to hide the proof of their crimes because they were ashamed and afraid of more uprisings. But they couldn't get rid of the mark that the revolt made on history. People who lived through the Sobibor rebellion and scholars write about how brave the rebels were. When Thomas T.V. Blatt got away, he said that he resisted not just to stay alive, but also to get even. His words perfectly describe the mood of that October day, which was a mix of hopelessness, defiance, and desperation. They are still a powerful reminder of how people can stand up to oppression. Medical atrocities. In the horrifying background of the Holocaust, there is one especially horrible part that reads like a nightmare: the medical trials that were done on prisoners. In places like Auschwitz and Ravensbrück, science and violence were mixed in a disturbing way. In Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, the main goal was to kill everyone. In the early 1940s, doctors and nurses, whose job it was to fix, used their knowledge to make people suffer in the name of scientific progress. The notorious Dr. Karl Klauberg did tests on sterilization at Auschwitz. He looked for ways to sterilize a lot of people at once. To do this, he put women through painful processes where acids were injected into their uteruses, which often ended in serious problems or death. The medical staff in these camps treated the prisoners like test animals, taking away their identities. They were put through drug tests without their permission. These tests included drug tests and processes with unknown and sometimes fatal results that left prisoners with health problems that made it hard for them to do their jobs. In addition to drug tests, others looked into hypothermia and high altitudes, which were meant to mimic conditions that troops might face. But for the prisoners, it was a dangerous dance with death, as many of them died during the tests. The scariest parts were the trials with contagious diseases. Dr. Erwin Ding Schuler deliberately gave prisoners diseases like typhus or tuberculosis so that he could study them and look for ways to help them. He said this to make his suffering for possible vaccines seem more acceptable. Among these doctors, Dr. Josef Mengele is the most well-known. As a fervent attempt to understand genetics and boost the Aryan population, his fixation on twins led to cruel trials, such as forced insemination and limb transplants. Families desperately hid twins when they got there because they knew Mengele, who was dubbed the Angel of Death, would want to use them in his trials. During the Holocaust, these cruel medical tests are still a dark and scary part of history. The S-Kommando. The scary story of the S-Kommando is one that is often forgotten in the vastness of horror. The part these men were given pushed the limits of human endurance during the cruel process of killing everyone. S-Kommando stands for Special Unit, which is funny since their job was to pick out and kill Jews who were brought to the camps. These guys were locked up alone and had to do horrible work, like herding people into gas chambers and burying their dead bodies in crematoriums. They were stuck in a terrible cycle where their only chance of life was to keep the killing machines running smoothly. In Auschwitz, Zalman Gradowski was in the S-Kommando and wrote about their adventures. His writing was found buried near the crematoriums. It's scary to think that he knew how powerless and hopeless they felt because he called them slaves and wouldn't even let them be buried properly. They were forced to see how evil the Nazis were, and their terrible fate brought them together in a special way. In 1944, some members tried to fight back against their masters by staging an uprising with makeshift weapons they got secretly from the camp's factory. It showed how strong their spirit was. Every day, the S-Kommando had to deal with heartbreaking problems. They knew the deepest Nazi secrets, which made it hard for them to stay alive because they were replaced by newcomers who kept the death machine running and erased any records of what happened. Their morals were fuzzy because they were pulled between the need to stay alive and the pain of helping to kill a lot of people. Some people wrote accounts of their experiences and hid them in the ruins of the camp. These accounts are very helpful for understanding what happened. One note found in Auschwitz talked about how desperate they were to find people outside of the smoke of the crematoriums. This showed how much they wanted a life other than the horrible things they had to go through. The Holocaust's horrifying transit system, the railways of the Reich. The Reich's railways were once seen as signs of growth and connection, but when the Third Reich took over, they turned into horrible places. Instead of being used for business and tourism as usual, these trains were used for horrible things. During the Holocaust, the Nazi train system was the main way that people got to the death camps. This was very different from the romanticized image of steam engines running through beautiful landscapes. Germany had been known for a long time for having very good train systems. But during the Holocaust, this complicated web of tracks became Adolf Hitler's way of seeing the world. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and one of the masterminds behind the Holocaust, knew that trains were a good way to kill a lot of people quickly. In the early 1940s, these railroads were bringing in crowded stock cars from all over the Third Reich. These people included Jews, Roma, resistance fighters, and others who were seen as undesirable. Instead of comfortable passenger compartments, inmates had to deal with dark, suffocating, and overcrowded circumstances. Some were so thirsty that they tried to get water from the wooden walls of the wagons. The Nazis' goals grew as the war went on, and they began to remove people from faraway places like Greece, Norway, and France. Adolf Eichmann, who was in charge of sending a lot of people to death camps, worked with the railway authorities to make sure that trains kept going to the camps. It was terrifyingly clear how efficient it was. In 1942, more than 300,000 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto were sent to Treblinka in just 2 months. Because these camps were close to major train lines, getting from the ghetto to the gas chamber was easy. On the other hand, some brave people tried to escape. A group of young Jews were able to get out of their carriage by jumping and running away from their guards. Behind the scenes, Julius Dorpmüller, who was the Reich Minister of Transport, made sure that trains ran on time, even when they were transporting people to and from the Holocaust. But in the dark, These trains carried more than just prisoners. They held a lot of stories about hope, love, loss, and the strength of the human spirit. With each wheel click, the stories of the people on board could be heard. SS leaders. Through the Holocaust, there were men and women in SS uniforms who were in charge of directing the killing. These people were in charge of and worked at camps like Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. They were interesting historical people because they were from different places and did strange things for different reasons. Take a look at Franz Stangl, who was in charge at Treblinka. Stangl was born in Altenmarkt, Austria, in 1908. At first, he worked as a police officer. His behavior changed for the worse when he joined a program that hurt disabled people. When he started working at Treblinka in 1942, Stangl was fully committed to planning and carrying out mass killings. But he often seemed calm, so people called him White Death because he liked wearing white uniforms. Those who lived remembered times when he was very cruel. Surprisingly, Stangl said he didn't feel bad about what he did after the war, which is similar to what Hannah Arendt said about evil being normal. Sobibor, on the other hand, was run by Franz Reichleitner, who was also a police officer in Austria. Before he was in charge of the deaths of about 100,000 Jews at Sobibor, he was part of the T4 program. An interesting fact is that Reichleitner died violently while on duty in Italy in 1944, just like he had planned for many other people. Christian Wörth, who was called the Beast of Belzec, was the first leader of Belzec. Belzec became more violent during World War I, before he played a big part in creating gas chamber technology for the T4 program. When asked if what he did was moral, he said something very scary. He said that everyone felt guilty, but that it was easier to be in the SS. There were a lot of cops, guards, and support staff who were a part of this tragic play. It's important to remember them. They joined for a variety of reasons, such as to be loyal to Nazi ideas, to further their own careers, or to avoid being involved with killing. The commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, said that he felt a strong sense of duty that drove him to excuse his actions. This shows the mental gymnastics people did to fit their actions into the skewed ideas of the time. The numbers. Throughout history, words have not been enough. This is how horrible the Nazi death camps were. Numbers, even though they are cold and hard to understand, tell the stories of many lives lost. Hidden in the Polish countryside, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec are sad memories of how cruel people can be. These weren't like normal prison camps where people are forced to work. They were death factories that were built to kill so many people that it's hard to imagine. The most famous death camp, Treblinka, was only open for 15 months, but took the lives of about 900,000 people. Because Treblinka was known for being so cruel, the name became linked to death. About 250,000 people were killed quickly and efficiently at Sobibor, which is a little farther to the south. At least 434,000 people, mostly Jews from Poland's Lublin district, were killed at Belzec, which was farther to the south. SS officer Christian Wörth, who was Belzec's first commandant, reportedly called it a death factory. It's hard to fully understand these numbers. Imagine a camp that processed 10,000 people every day, which is the same as killing everyone in a small town every day. The Nazis had a hard time dealing with all the bodies, so they used horrible methods like burning human fat to speed up the process. There are real people with stories behind these numbers. A pediatrician named Janus Korczak decided to go with the 200 children in his care to the gas chambers at Treblinka, rather than leaving them behind. Another example is Samuel Feldstein, a famous artist who died in Sobibor with his family. Someday these people and their stories might be forgotten. The most profound way to understand how terrible the extermination was, though, is through these human stories. Each number stands for a family member, like a parent, sibling, or child, and holds a world of unknown hopes, fears, and loves, including amazing stories of kindness during the Holocaust. Tales of compassion. Some people stood out in a time of great darkness. These were the good people in the countries, even though there was a lot of evil around them. They chose kindness over fear and humanity over hatred. In the 1940s, when the Nazis were terrorizing the Jews in Krakow, Poland, Oskar Schindler, an unlikely hero, used his factory to keep about 1,200 Jews safe. His well-known book Schindler's List saved many lives. As he put it, "When you know people, you have to treat them like human beings." A Swedish ambassador named Raoul Wallenberg did brave things to save tens of thousands of Jews. He used his diplomatic skills and resolve to give out protective passports, claim buildings as Swedish land, and turn them into safe havens all over Europe. A lot of other people did brave things. In Lithuania, Owner S brought food and notes into the Vilnius ghetto without permission. This helped Jewish students escape to the Italian Alps. A Catholic priest named Don Giuseppe Gervasio took in Jews who were being attacked and let them stay in his monastery until they could escape to Switzerland. When asked to name Jews in France, Pastor André Trocmé stood by his view that everyone is equal and protected many people in his town, Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. These brave stories came from a variety of places. Some are well known, like Miep Gies, who hid Anne Frank's family. Others are only talked about in history books. The Talmud says, "Saving one life is like saving the whole world." What they did shows that this is true. Diaries and other writings from people who lived in and survived the Holocaust shed light on certain parts of the terrible story. Diaries and testimonies. People who went through the Holocaust can shed light on parts of its long story. Stories, diaries, and accounts from places like Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka show us a dark world. They show bits of humanity, strength, and the hard truth of life in the camps. In Poland in 1939, the tension was obvious, a sign that a storm was coming to Europe. A lot of Jews kept their hope alive in the early days of the war by writing down their worries and hopes. Like Anne Frank, Rutka Latzia, a young girl from Bedzin, wrote in her notebook to escape. She wrote, "I can't believe I'll ever go out without the yellow star, or that this war will end. If it does, I might lose my mind from joy." Although Rutka died in Auschwitz, her diary was found years later, a testament to her enduring spirit. People in occupied Poland saw Sobibor as a grim sign of death in the woods there. Still, stories of the human spirit came up even there. Dutch Jew Giel Schellis, who lived through Sobibor, talked about being squished into freight cars, getting to Sobibor, and losing his family within hours. Not only did his evidence show how horrible things were, but it also showed how strong he was in writing down the history of the camp. In Treblinka, which is probably the most well-known death camp, people died quickly. But in the midst of the darkness, brave stories came to light. One of the few people who made it out of the camp alive, young Polish Jew Samuel Willenberg, told them how to get out. He gave a vivid account of the horrifying mood of the camp, which was marked by the constant burnings. Still, his writing showed some human moments, tiny acts of kindness and brief links that gave us a fuller picture of Treblinka. Besides the stories of survivors, even the confessions of Nazi soldiers reveal scary things. Franz Stangl, who was in charge of Treblinka and was captured in 1967, talked about how the camp worked and said, "I am clear in my conscience about what I did." It is a troubling reminder of how deeply people were brainwashed and disconnected from humanity, how people who were not involved in the Holocaust but were afraid and indifferent to what was going on around them. Indifference. During the Holocaust, there was another kind of silence that was quieter but just as harmful, the silence of onlookers. These people decided to ignore the bad things going on around them, either because they didn't care or because they were afraid. In the towns and villages close to the death camps, everyday life seemed normal. People were being carried to terrible deaths by passing trains, but locals went about their daily lives. Some people really didn't know, and others purposely didn't say anything about the scary stories. This behavior wasn't just happening near the camps. In Europe that was ruled by the Nazis, people talked about the Holocaust behind closed doors. In Amsterdam, Anne Frank's family relied on a small group of kind people for years, while many others either didn't care or might have even told on them. Anne wrote in her notebook that she felt thankful, scared, and unsure about the world outside. On a global level, people talked about the Holocaust in whispers, not out loud. People didn't believe reports that the Polish government in exile was killing a lot of people. Jan Karski, a member of the Polish resistance, tried to warn the world by meeting with British and American leaders, but the Nazi plan was so big that it seemed impossible. Some countries didn't do anything because they were busy with the war, but others had more sinister reasons. Not long before the Holocaust, at the Evian Conference in 1938, most countries, including the US and UK, said they would not take in many Jewish survivors. Even though most people didn't care, there were pockets of defiance and kindness. To save thousands of Jews, diplomats like Raoul Wallenberg of Sweden and Chiune Sugihara of Japan gave them passes. People in Denmark did an amazing thing by hiding over 7,000 Jews and sneaking them into neutral Sweden. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust victim, was right when he said that the opposite of love was not hate, but indifference. There were horrible things going on in the worst Nazi concentration camps. Among the worst things that happened in the Holocaust were the deaths at Treblinka and Sobibor. Both were death camps that were built with one goal in mind: to kill a lot of people. The death camp Treblinka was in Poland and was open from July 1942 to November 1943. It is thought that between 800,000 and 1 million Jews were killed there. Treblinka I was a camp for people who were made to work, and Treblinka II was a camp where people were killed. When people arrived at Treblinka II, they were sent straight to gas chambers. The conditions were terrible, and the killings were planned and cruel. From May 1942 to October 1943, Sobibor, which was also in Poland, was open. There, about 250,000 Jews were killed. Like Treblinka, Sobibor was a death camp where most of the people who died were put in gas chambers and killed. It started in October 1943 at Sobibor, where a group of inmates led by Soviet prisoner of war Alexander Pechersky rose up against the Nazis. Many people died while trying to escape, but some were able to get out. In a Nazi death camp, this was one of the few revolts that actually worked. The post-war pursuit of justice. Crimes committed during the Holocaust were punished after the war. Not only were there battlegrounds in Europe, but there were also deep scars from the Holocaust. As more about the Holocaust came to light, people wanted justice. This led to two stories that are connected: the Nazis' desperate efforts to hide their crimes and the never-ending search for those responsible. As the Allies moved into German land, top Nazi leaders tried to hide the truth about places like Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, because they knew how bad their actions were. Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS, ordered that thousands of bodies be dug up and burned. As a final act of rebellion, the once deadly machines were turned into huge crematoriums that emitted smoke. In the middle of these attempts to hide what happened, an interesting event happened at Sobibor. Franz Reichleitner, who was in charge of the camp, gave a Polish farmer a gold pocket watch in late 1943 and told him that it could save his life if he needed it to. This watch later proved to be very bad evidence against him at his trial. As the Allies freed one camp after another, soldiers and reporters were shocked by how horrible things were. They wrote down proof of the Nazis' horrible killing tools, which went against what captured SS officers and camp guards said about them being ignorant and denying what they knew. Nuremberg became known as the City of Justice because it was the site of famous trials after the war, where high-ranking Nazi officials, diplomats, and military leaders were charged with crimes against humanity. Nazi leader Hermann Göring often fought with prosecutors and tried to avoid taking responsibility, even though there was a lot of proof against him. After Nuremberg, justice was also served on other people, such as Franz Stangl, the notorious commander of Treblinka, who fled to Brazil after the war. When he was finally caught in 1967 and put on trial, he played down his part in Hitler's plan to kill all Jews. Survivors became advocates for remembering and justice, and their important statements helped put many of the criminals on death row. Thomas Blatt, a Sobibor victim, spent years writing about how the camp worked so that no one who did wrong could get away with it. He often said, "I lived to bear witness," which meant that he would always remember his friends who had died. Archaeology, digging for humanity. Archaeology sets out to find stories that haven't been told, because history is hard to understand, because records are few and memories are short. Concentration camps like Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, which were once horrible places, have been turned back into peaceful places, leaving no trace of their sad history. Archaeology is a field that listens to the Earth's whispers and digs up stories that have been lost for a long time. Going back to 2014, a group led by Dr. Caroline Sturdy-Coles looked deeper into Treblinka's dark landscape and found the remains of gas chambers under the peaceful fields. Surprisingly, people in the area used bricks from these rooms to rebuild Poland after the war, bringing the souls of those who had been tortured back to life. Israeli archaeologist Yoram Haim explored Sobibor in 2007 and found personal items like glasses, rings, coins, and even a pendant that looked a lot like Anne Frank's. This made a touching link between two tragic lives. Andrzej Koller's team slowly revealed Belzec's secrets in the southeast of Poland in the early 2000s by finding mass graves and sad things like children's toys and tools that showed glimpses of lives that were cut short. Writer and Holocaust survivor Primo Levi's words resonate. True witnesses are the drowned, the dead, the disappeared. Concerns about ethics hang over these digs, which is why many archaeologists choose non-intrusive ways to protect these holy places. Even though it's sad, these activities help fight Holocaust denial and keep historical facts alive. Every find, whether it's an artifact or a piece of architecture, brings a voice back to life, tells a story again, and remembers a person. As the names of horrifying concentration camps like Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec are spoken, the act of digging comes to represent people's never-ending search for truth and memory. There are stories of determination and bravery that show how strong people can be when things go wrong. There are memorials to the Holocaust in Poland, including Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. These and other places in Poland's huge landscapes remember the worst times in human history. Terrible things happened on these sites, which are now solemn reminders of the past. Today, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec are not just historical sites. They are places where people go to think, learn, and remember. A terrible thing happened to nearly 900,000 people in Treblinka, which is 80 miles northeast of Warsaw. The site has been changed, and now there is a field of 177,000 rocks there to mark it. Each rock represents a town or village that lost people in the camp. One of them is a big stone that says Warsaw to honor the city's once thriving Jewish community. Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner Elie Wiesel stood among these stones and said that survivors should remember the dead because not doing so would be the same as killing them again. To the south is Sobibor, which is tucked away in dense woods. A memorial walk leads people through the camp's old grounds, showing the sad path the prisoners took from when they arrived to the gas chambers. Survivors and their families planted trees as a live memorial to their strength and memory. During a memorial, a survivor named Giel Shelvis quoted an old Jewish proverb that said, "A person is forgotten only when their name is forgotten." This quote has become a symbol for the Sobibor Memorial Goal. A memorial building that opened in 2004 in Belzec is not as well known. but is just as important. There is a museum at the spot, as well as a huge field covered in black basalt and railway gravel to represent the victims and the trains that killed them. The design shows how wild the camp's past was. Michael Trenska, a historian, thought about how Belzec went from being a place of forgetfulness and disrespect to one of remembering and learning. During the opening of the memorial, there will be more than just these physical places. A number of educational programs will also be running to make sure that future generations learn from the past. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.